Good evening and welcome to the second hour of this pre-Halloween Velocity of Now special with me, your host, Thomas Sheridan, as always on this YouTube channel, as long as I'm still above room temperature. The website again is, as usual, www.mossuponstones.com. Like I said, if you want to buy a book, that would be great. In this second hour of the show, this is a topic I've wanted to discuss for a while because it's always interested me. It's always fascinated me. Just never got round to it. But now that I'm working on the H.P. Lovecraft documentary, the time seems right to talk about cryptids or cryptozoology. Fascinating, remarkable subject that has been with humanity since the dawn of time. Human beings have always had a belief or a notion that there were other animals or creatures or beings out there that were not part of the natural, familiar world. Of course, dragons being the most famous of them all. That doesn't mean dragons never existed. They probably did. Things can become extinct. This idea that everything leaves bones and everything can be found in fossils is simply not true. Bones deteriorate also. It's only under certain conditions that bones remain. It's very likely that the dinosaurs did exist, that their bones have vanished, or they've been mistaken for something else, such as dinosaurs. Dragons seem to be a universal one. They seem to be everywhere and just about every culture, although in terms of their archetype there's quite a difference between the East and Western dragon, but ultimately it all comes down to a creature who breathes fire and flies and doesn't exist anymore, or did exist somehow in another realm of consciousness that interacted with humans in the past. But the whole understanding of the dragon is that it never existed. But the dragon is also interesting. That it no longer exists. But the dragon is also interesting in that it kind of tells us of the two different types of cryptids that are out there. We have one type of cryptid that may be an undiscovered animal, and these are being found all the time. The oceans, still 90% plus of the oceans have never been discovered. This is why it's a horror that they're being polluted with plastics. At the bottom of the ocean, they have things called these, I think they're called black spouters or something like this, where they're volcanic eruptions that take place. Black smokers, they're called. And the amazing diversity of life exists around them. Previously, it was always believed that life could not exist where there was no sunlight. And these black smokers at the bottom of the oceans are covered in life, complex, large, and all different kinds of life. There was a cave in Romania after 2 million years was opened up, and it was full of animals, spiders and insects and some kinds of fish and other aquatic creatures that had been locked in an underground lake for 2.5 million years, and yet they survived without sunlight fine. So life is extremely diverse and extremely adaptable. So that's one kind, animals that haven't been discovered yet, or maybe existed in the past and no longer exist, and there's a belief that maybe they still exist. I have an old set of dictionaries here, and one entry talks about giant sea serpents. Now this is from 1900, these dictionaries, and it talks about the sea serpent as if it is a real creature, that there isn't enough information on it yet. Giants, I'm talking about serpents the size of ships. We know anomalies show up on Google Earth all the time. People find things, and we also hear about ancient stories going back for years of sailors encountering these giant animals in the ocean, giant squids, etc. We know they're real, but there's also stories of gigantic squids, such as the one that attacked the U-boat in World War II, a German U-boat between Scotland and Ireland. So that's one kind. Real living creatures that may or may not exist, haven't been discovered yet, or are extinct, and people think that there might be some of them left. Like there might be a Carpathian tiger left somewhere in the Transylvania forest of Romania, or there may be a Tasmanian devil left somewhere in the outbacks of Tasmania. The other kind being the almost supernatural kind, a creature that often doesn't make any sense in terms of its biology or its relationship to other animals, but for some reason these ones seem to have a profound effect upon the human psyche, in the same way that the previous ones, animals that do not or may have existed, these mysterious ones are the ones that interest me, because they're so odd and so strange, and yet they seem to generate a fear within people that say the Carpathian tiger wouldn't, if we found out that was true. And these are the ones that interest me. These fleeting visitors from other realms, these aspects of our slumbers that may or may not be true, that enter into local folklore for whatever reason, but they stick. One of the most famous ones of these is the Mothman. This is one that I've been very interested in for years, and I totally believe that the Mothman is on some level real. And that was popularized by John A. Keel's book, The Mothman Prophecies, made into a surprisingly good movie with Richard Gere. It all took place around Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Now, what made the book so remarkable, the original book by Keel, is the way the Mothman was integrated into other kinds of lore. Before the appearance of the Mothman, there were UFO lights seen up and down the Ohio Valley, where Manson County, West Virginia, and Point Pleasant are, along the river there. We don't know what these UFO lights are. They are just lights, hence the U in UFO. These elements of high strangeness then connected further in that there was US military experiments done in terms of ammunitions at a place called the TNT area, an abandoned munitions manufacturing and testing area not far from Point Pleasant. And I've never been to Point Pleasant, but I've read enough on the subject and talked to people that have been there that the area does have this high strangeness that certain places have. They have an energy about them that when you step into them, you feel like you're in another realm, or you're slightly outside or askew of this reality. We also had in the Mothman Prophecies, and in the mid-60s with the whole Mothman experience, the Men in Black. Now, the Men in Black, I firmly believe, are to do with fairy lore, that there's some kind of fairy. If you look at my Beyond Room 313 channel, there is a video about phantom or bogus social worker phenomena. And these are ostensibly a Men in Black type experience reported in Britain, Ireland, and Nova Scotia, Celtic lands, where fairy fate or fairy traditions existed. I believe that the Men in Black come from the same thing. And of course, along with the sightings of the Mothman himself, which was a winged bipedal semi-humanoid with glowing red eyes, we had the collapse of the Silver Bridge, the bridge going across the Ohio River, in an appalling human tragedy that led to many deaths. The collapse of the bridge is somehow connected to the sighting of the Mothman, is somehow connected to the appearance of the Men in Black in Point Pleasant, and is somehow connected to the strange lights up and down the Ohio Valley. Phenomenal story. It was almost like reality in that part of West Virginia at that time went haywire. It literally went haywire. And the Mothman left the most powerful impression with people in the community, but also worldwide. There was a familiarity about the Mothman when many of us heard about it, even people who didn't know about the Mothman history or lore or John Keel's book. When they came across the Mothman, either through the movie with Richard Gere or on some documentary on the History Channel or some other show, there was a familiarity about it. The Mothman triggered something in us, whether it was an ancestral memory or whether it was connected to some transient state of being where we cross between dimensions, either through dreams or other transcendental states. It seemed to be universal, somehow connected to the Thunderbird of the Native Americans, also to fairy lore. It was almost like the perfect place. You had this Native American tradition coupled with this part of West Virginia where you had people from the Appalachian tradition and also German immigrants, Welsh, Irish, Ulster immigrants, English immigrants, all living in this same area. And the Mothman experience, possibly caused by a foreshadowing of the psychic trauma unleashed by the collapse of the Silver Bridge over the river, which led to so many deaths, may have literally ripped reality open and fractured the space-time experience. If Mothman exists, I do not believe it is a creature, as in an undiscovered mammal or bird or flying humanoid. It is most likely like these cryptids or cryptozoology type legendary creatures that are from another dimension or generated by our minds. Another one of these creatures with wings from a very similar area to the Ohio Valley of West Virginia and Ohio is the Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil is seen mostly in the South Jersey Pine Barrens and other parts of rural New Jersey and into southeastern Pennsylvania. Now, if you don't know New Jersey, it is a small state that is sandwiched between the New York metropolitan area and the Philadelphia metropolitan area. Northern New Jersey itself is extremely industrialized. It still is, even to this day, and also very heavily populated. It's the most densely populated state in the US. Southern New Jersey is vacation land. It's places like Cape and beaches and those kinds of areas. In between New Jersey and in between Philadelphia is an area known as the Pine Barrens. Now, the Pine Barrens is the most inhospitable forest or woodland you've ever seen in your life. The trees don't look right, the place doesn't look right. There's a sinister feeling about it. Now remember, this is between New York and Philadelphia. This place should not exist in the heavily populated. It's such a paradox, such an enormous paradox, but yet there it is. And they even have their own type of hillbillies, which are known as pinies, who live inside the Pine Barrens, who have their own distinct culture, very similar or an offshoot along the lines of the Appalachian cultures of the Appalachian Mountains. Now, as I said, the Pine Barrens are just very, very odd. There's very few roads through them, and there's a couple of train lines that go through them, and that's it really. The thing is quite inhospitable. It's not like one of these managed woodlands. There are hiking trails in certain parts of it where you can hike into it and you can get around, but that's only the managed woodland part. The rest of it is like the woodlands, what they were in ancient times. You've got brambles and decayed trees, and it's not all kinds of snakes and It's full of ticks and other things that can make you very ill if they bite you. And it's filled with rattlesnakes. And whatever else is down there, your foot might cut itself on and become infected. It's not a hospitable place, although it's between one of the biggest cities in the world and a very, very other large metropolitan area. That this wilderness, this absolute and total wilderness exists. Now, I almost bought a house down there that was overlooking the Pine Barrens. I was there for a while, and behind the house was a river, and then there was a large marsh type area. It was just a pure marsh, and in the distance you could see a factory to the right, but directly across from the back deck it was a clear view, and about a mile away was the edge of the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. Now, I never saw the New Jersey Devil, but strange lights used to appear in the woods, and they weren't people walking with flashlights, because you can't get in there. You can't get in there with a boat. You couldn't walk in there because it's a marsh. It's filled with rattlesnakes, and you can't enter it from the road on the other side because it would be just unbelievably difficult. And yet this is the domain of the Jersey Devil. Now, the Jersey Devil, to look at it, it looks as a horse's kind of head and upper body. Its back feet are kind of strange. This is how it's been reported, with a tail, and then it has dragon type wings. Now, we can say this is a literal being, that because the Pine Barrens are so inhospitable, this Jersey Devil creature could exist. I would like to throw another flavour into the pot and suggest that the Jersey Devil is probably something along the lines of the Mothman, where the Mothman was generated by the foreshadow of the trauma of the Silver Bridge collapsing. The Jersey Devil came about as a result of the sense of isolation and impassibility of the Pine Barrens. Hence, a horse is no use in the Pine Barrens unless you can cut through it or have a road. It's no use having a horse. It cannot traverse that landscape. But if a horse had wings, it could fly over the Pine Barrens. So the Jersey Devil is almost like a psychic compensator in the form of a tulpa or something similar, generated by people who feel a sense of isolation and being trapped within the Pine Barrens. A flying horse would be the way to escape from the Pine Barrens. Now, this throws in another, shall we say, element of high strangeness. Could this subconscious desire, via the collective unconscious of the Pineys in the Pine Barren, have actually given birth and manifested this real creature? I did a show recently where we were talking about, the host asked me, well, what are demons? Why do they appear in specific forms? And I said, well, they are an element of consciousness that may or may not be connected to us, but they manifest in a way that we are familiar with, either through cultural programming or through the nature of our desires, or what you're expecting. So you will manifest Beelzebub exactly as he's laid out in the Goetia. You will manifest Lovecraftian type entities, if that's what you're expecting to get, if you're working by the fictional version of the Necronomicon. The Necronomicon doesn't actually exist. There's a fictional version of it that was very popular with teenagers back in the day because it had that nice sinister vibe to it. But chaos magicians will tell you they've absolutely have invoked Cthulhu, Azathoth, and other Negos and other elements within the Lovecraft mythos, simply because of this unresolved consciousness has resolved into something they wanted. Grant Morrison talks about creating John Lennon's head in his living room, sitting there talking, because he was a huge Beatles and John Lennon fan. And that doesn't mean John Lennon appeared, but the image was resolved into this form. And the Jersey Devil, a winged horse, is part of this underlying trauma or neuroses within the Pineys to not feel so trapped. And you could probably apply that to the Mothman. The Mothman has what? Wings. What happened to the Silver Bridge? It fell into the river. How would those people have escaped the falling bridge if they could fly away? Why does he have red lights? Well, because red eyes. Because red lights is what caused the tragedy. There was a red light on the bridge. The traffic stopped and then it fell. You see? Just because it's a manifestation of a trauma does not make it less real. It will appear, it will manifest, it will show up. This is almost like cryptozoology meets chaos magic. Terribly, terribly interesting stuff when you get out of the presuppositions or the prejudices that have been put into your head regarding these creatures. And they exist all over the world. Lots of them tend to be apes, and lots of them tend to be semi-humanoid. Of course, you have things like lizard men that live in... There's a lizard man that lives in South Carolina called the Lizard Man of Lee County. Another thing, it's almost... this is the whole thing. The same old joke while they say, how come people in cities are never abducted? And how come it's only hillbillies who see aliens, or hillbillies who see Sasquatch or other kinds of things like the Jersey Devil? It's because these people live closer to nature and therefore at the mercy of nature to a far greater degree than what people who live in cities are. In fact, if you look at Whitley Strieber's book Communion, the initial, even though he lived in New York City and Manhattan, the abduction experiences and also the initial abduction encounter took place in his home in the middle of the woods in upstate New York, where there is a vulnerability. There is a vulnerability, and this gives rise to what Lovecraft called the phantasms of our slumbers. Now, this brings us to Bigfoot. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, a large and hairy ape-like humanoid creature spotted on quite a vast region of the United States and Canada. There's a myth or a belief that Bigfoot has been only seen in places such as remote parts of the Cascade Mountains in Idaho, in parts of the Pacific Northwest, the Yukon, but it's also been seen in places like New Jersey, Pennsylvania, upstate New York, Maine, even I believe Connecticut. It's been seen in reported in a lot of places. Again, what does Bigfoot represent? Is Bigfoot an undiscovered type of humanoid? Could be. There's a lot of evidence and some very interesting things regarding footprints and hairs on the body. But it could still be a manifestation of the same kind of chaos cryptid generation that brings it into full reality where it has a body weight and so on. But it could also be, just like Mothman and the Jersey Devil, a representation of a suppressed fear regarding the wilderness. And I know the Native Americans believe in it as well. But I think that if there's one that could actually be very real and probably be found in my lifetime, I would probably put my money on Bigfoot, because it's in a very grey area between this kind of chaos cryptid idea of a generated telepathic form and also an unknown humanoid or ape or bear person type creature or hybrid. I've seen some videos of the thing screaming in the woods, and it's the most terrifying scream you've ever heard. Again, is that scream real? Is that scream the actual Bigfoot, or is that again a voice coming out of nowhere? The phantasm of our slumbers. Bigfoot is probably probably the second most famous one after the next one I'm going to talk about. But the thing is that these things are part of the same lore that we've always had of a creature that may or may not exist, that may or may not be real. And these things will always exist. They'll always be part of us. They're in the same world as fairy lore and aliens and ghosts and demons. They're all in the same thing. But in terms of the cryptids, there may be crossovers. The famous Bigfoot video or film that was taken by the ranchers or the hunters, where you see what he filmed them while he was looking back at him, that is a very convincing piece of footage. And it's not the only one. There's another that does not look like someone in a costume or an outfit. That absolutely looks like what it's supposed to be, a Sasquatch. There's another one where someone is filming at a campground somewhere in America, and you see this thing coming out, sprinting out of one piece of forest at an incredibly high speed, running at an unbelievable pace, and then into another forest to be hidden. But along the way, it seems to pick up a smaller Sasquatch or Bigfoot and carry it in its arms, as if this thing had wandered, its infant had wandered out of the woods, was near humans. The parent, the mother, sprinted out in a very instinctual way, as any mammal would, grabbed the baby, and then disappeared back into the dense woods again. Is Bigfoot dangerous? Possibly. We do have these large numbers of people who have vanished without a trace inside America's national parks. These people should be found. It's almost like what's capturing them has an intelligence and knows how to hide the trail in a way that a predator like a mountain lion or a wolf wouldn't, or a bear wouldn't. It knows how to dispose of evidence. You could say it's a serial killer. In some cases, no doubt. In other cases, you do have to wonder. Bigfoot has evidence, and people will say, "Oh well, but the United States is so populated, and there's so much technology and heat thermal and all this stuff." I was in Maine a couple of weeks ago. Maine is about the size of Ireland. Now that's tiny by American standards. That's tiny. That's nothing compared to the forests of Canada, the Yukon, British Columbia, the Pacific Northwest. That's nothing compared to those forests all the way up to Alaska. And yet, you can go off the highway anywhere in central Maine, walk into the woods, and within an hour, you are truly trapped and you are truly in a wilderness. And that's just Maine. So don't give me this thing that in America they'd be able to find Bigfoot. You could have a sustainable breeding population that could exist, no problem, in these areas and not be found, especially if it's highly intelligent and wants to be elusive. It's not as if America, the wilderness, America is still a place of vast, vast wilderness. People forget that. Americans forget that. And there's still parts of those areas I've just mentioned where humans have never been. There's parts of Maine, even, and upstate New York, where no human being, that modern human being, has actually set foot in. That's how much remote area is in the US and how much forest. Animals can hunt, and if they flew over with a thermal imaging device, it would be useless, because what they would see would be thousands of thermal prints of deer and bears and grizzly bears. How would you distinguish a grizzly bear from a Sasquatch through a thermal imaging camera? And if they have a high sense of smell, they can smell humans coming in, they can smell gunpowder, and also even the hunters don't go deep into the woods. They stay in areas where they can be found. Now, the most famous of all the cryptids is our friend Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster. Now, the Loch Ness Monster, I have my own theory about that, but it's so written into law that Nessie even has its own Latin name, Nessiteras Rhombopoperex in Loch Ness in Scotland. Again, giant monster. The main theories prevailing around Nessie and the Loch Ness monster is that we're dealing with a dinosaur, an aquatic creature left over from the dinosaur times that was trapped in the lake. And although Nessie is big, that was one place I would find it difficult to believe. I'd be much more likely to believe that there are giant creatures like that, such as the Kraken and the Selma, in the seas, or maybe in some very large lakes. There's a lake near here called Loch Ness, which is quite big and has a monster, but it's never been found. And you have other ones around, like there's one called Manipogo in Lake Manitoba in Canada. You have a thing called the Lergerfat worm in Iceland, and Kushi in Japan, all lake monsters. This, again, like the dragon, the archetype exists everywhere, and indeed the Sasquatch has a Himalayan counterpart in the Yeti. Now that's a true wilderness and may well exist as some kind of ape. My belief is, that Yeti was created by Aleister Crowley when he abandoned the Abermelin the Mage ritual to go off to see MacGregor's Mathers, and he opened the portal and some entity or unresolved creature came in the lake, and I've been predicting that this thing will appear in the media with more sightings as Boleskine House is in the news where the ritual took place. And sure enough, when Boleskine House was burnt down, there was loads of Nessie sightings. When Boleskine House was purchased, burnt down again, there was loads of flare-up of Nessie sightings. And now that Boleskine House is being restored, sympathetically in terms of the legacy of Crowley and Jimmy Page who lived there, we've had one of the biggest Nessie sightings of all recently. That proves to me that Nessie is directly related to the consciousness elements of the Abermelin the Mage ritual that took place on the shores of Loch Ness in Boleskine House by Crowley. Now, people will say there were sightings before that. There was only one other sighting before that, and that was St. Columba, and that was back in the 8th and 7th century. And he mentioned a devil or a demon, and it didn't take place in Loch Ness. It took place in the River Ness, a long distance away. And also, he exorcised demons and monsters from all kinds of lakes back then in Britain and Ireland. And that was an allegory for rooting out the pagans. There's also a similar one. I made a film about it on Open Source Occult TV on the Dvarku, the water hound, which is a large carnivorous otter-type creature that lives in a very beautiful place called Grenade Lake in County Leitrim here in Ireland. And that also seems to be something along the lines of a Mothman type experience, because it's related to the brutal death of a woman, which may or not have happened at the hands of her husband. And the human mind has an incredible way of creating things. This is why we're involved in magic. This is why we're involved in magic. Now, there's ones that are definitely true. That there's great evidence, such as these gigantic anacondas that you get in South America. I mean, again, there's enough place. A thing will feed. It will get that. It will do that. Then there's a bunyip in Australia, which is almost like a mammalian version of a sea crocodile, a saltwater crocodile, that also lives in a cave. This may also be resolved into the fears of the outback. There always seems to be that. It's always in these areas that haven't still been fully conquered by man, whether it's the pine barrens and so on. And then you have the beast of Bodmore in England, and the large cats. That's another thing too, this large cat. Now, some of these would be pets, people that had large cats, pumas, leopards and so on, that they either escaped or got rid of them. But sometimes they just appear out of the blue. Like around here a few years ago, two kangaroos were spotted. And I did everything to try and trace down, and they were filmed on the road, who had these kangaroos as pets, and no one came forward. Now could be a case of the person who had them didn't want to get in trouble, but the bodies of them haven't been found, and it's not that remote around here, and there would be plenty of things like wild dogs and stuff that would try and prey on them. But here's an interesting one. In the area where it happened, there was a lot of young people at that time had emigrated to Australia because the economy had turned down and people went to Australia looking for jobs. And then suddenly at the same time, 2 kangaroos are spotted in the area. You see where I'm going with this? Are the big cats related to a need for a predator to deal with rodents? Is it a desire to bring back wolves? There's definitely something damaged in the Irish psyche with the absence of wolves from Ireland, especially as this country was once known as Wolf Island, and the wolf was so intrinsically connected to the Celtic and Gaelic identity. They're not here. They lasted until the 1700s, very, very late, I might add, much later than they did in Britain. And now every single country in mainland Europe now has wolves, even places that we'd be amazed to have them, like Denmark and Holland. Britain and Ireland are the last outpost where they don't exist. There's real serious talk now to bring them into Scotland from Norway, the same species of them. And I've said this and said it again, until the wolf is back on Ireland's soil, until wolves are living on this island again, wild, we will not fully capture our Celtic soul, because something was lost from us and the Scots when we lost our wolves, but we lost them much later, while they were exterminated by English landlords. So you see there's an element of desire there, but there's also that Christian element that will stop us from wanting the wolves back. You'll have people on TV saying things like, well, they're a predator who will destroy livestock. And they're not really saying it for that reason, because they know that any wolf introduction into Ireland can be managed. It can be regulated. You can fence off forest parks. We have technology today that you can put a chip in a wolf if you wanted, and if it wandered outside an area, you could find it easy enough and take it back or kill it. So there's all kinds of ways to stop wolves from, going and attacking livestock. And these people know that. But why they really don't want the wolf back is because an element of them will be driven by the Christianity inside them not to do it. This is actually what stopped the Presbyterian plantation of Ireland. The English Presbyterians and the Scottish Presbyterians refused to come to Ireland because it was full of wolves. They lived in mortal terror of the wolf, and they associated the wild Irish and the wolf as being a kind of a berserker hybrid, or a wolf hybrid. And this terrified them. And not until the wolves were fully exterminated did they move into those areas. The wolves had to be eradicated, and then the Puritans moved in. Interesting, isn't it? So the wolf was a real-life animal representing the fears, in a kind of a cryptid sense, of the parts of Ireland they couldn't get into yet. And you had that with Africa and gorillas. Nobody believed that gorillas were real until they were brought back from Africa. They used to laugh at the idea of a gigantic monkey or ape, even though they were aware of apes in Europe, such as the apes that live in down in Gibraltar, the Barbary apes. They're quite small. The idea of an ape as big as a man or bigger than a man was seen as laughable. Laughable. And that shows you where the power is. When the Roman legions first encountered the elephants of Carthage, they were frozen in terror because they'd never seen an elephant. It's the same thing with the Mayans and the wolfhounds brought by the conquistadors. There's an element, when you encounter a beast like that you've never seen before, you freeze in terror until you're used to it and learn how to kill it. And that's where these cryptids, these ones such as the Jersey Devil, and come from. They come from that fear of the wild, unconquered states of the psyche being represented by unconquered states of the environment. And that's what makes them real. All cryptids are real. Doesn't matter if they've only left a footprint, someone's recorded the noise, a fuzzy photograph, which is what you'll get. The reason why the fuzzy images of Loch Ness Monster exist and Bigfoot exist is the same reason why the fuzzy images of UFOs exist. No matter how good and sharp your camera is, the more you zoom in, the less distinguishable it becomes, because the energetic form that's making up the resolved image, the tulpa, whatever, is literally being shattered as you look into it. The same way that when you look at things like CERN, the more they look and deeper into the nature of reality, the less they find. There's nothing in there. Eventually they will discover that at the heart of matter, there's absolutely nothing. And the same thing with these cryptids, these Mothman type cryptids, these Bigfoot, these Loch Ness Monster, Jersey Devil. From a distance, they may be identifiable as what they're supposed to look like, the archetype, the shape, the myth, whatever. You zoom in with a camera or you get close to them, it's like they're coming to the end of the rainbow. The rainbow is sharp and distinct from a mile away. It can even be surprisingly sharp and distinct in places like Ireland from, say, 500 yards. But you walk down to the place where that rainbow has started from, you will not find it. It's the same thing with these cryptids. They're only fully resolvable in visual forms from a distance. And that's what makes them an amazing topic. So they are all real. So I hope you enjoyed this 2-hour special for a pre-Halloween Samhain Velocity of Now. Again, www.mossuponstones.com. Look out for the H.P. Lovecraft documentary on my Beyond Room 313 YouTube channel. And don't forget to keep a regular eye out on the Open Source Occult TV YouTube channel for my little vlogs and discussions and observations, mostly to do with the occult and magic. And look after yourself. And remember, never, like this subject tonight, or aliens being all spacemen, never allow yourself to be narrowed into one field of view, one reality tunnel, as Robert Anton Wilson called them. Always keep looking and always keep that imagination open. Be inquisitive, but don't be harshly cynical. Be open-minded, but not so your brain falls out. And you will find that life is a wondrous adventure, and you will live in the world of magic, mythology, and megaliths if you're interested in that stuff, just by being in the now and considering all these possibilities. So long live Lucifer, Ave Lucifer, and long live the Horn Gods. And as ever, with everything in life, look after yourself and feck 'em if they can't take a joke.